Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy. And today's video is just going to be another one of my walk around tours of the sustenance and covering permaculture project. Now every time I do one of these I get a whole lot of compliments and a whole lot of people asking me to do even more, and I understand completely, because prior to the days of the internet, when all you had was a library full of books, I used to sit and read those books and fantasize about what it would be to live this lifestyle for hours on end. And the best thing is, the reality is even better than the fantasy. And my trees are not even really producing yet. We're barely getting enough to keep the squirrels happy. So I know that in the very near future that it's going to get even better. So we're going to walk around for a little while, and I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I got going on here. And things get better and better every single time, so I am very excited to show you the things that I'm doing. Alright, these growing boxes used to be my garden, and I kind of lost my steam. It was a lot of work. Had to fertilize and weed, and trees don't really require that much. And in fact, with trees, your fertilizer can just be the things that you produce in your house that most people consider waste. Coffee grounds, tea bags, vegetable peelings, and even your own waste. And I've got chickens, so even the waste of the chickens goes in here. But this is a persimmon tree, and what it's surrounded by is asparagus. We don't do asparagus in the Deep South, and I highly recommend you don't even attempt this. I know a whole bunch of people that have attempted it. It does not work anywhere in zone 8 or 9. So don't even and don't bother with reading the labels, because Lowe's or any of them big box stores are going to have this stuff on the shelf, and it's going to tell you it's good all the way to zone 9, and it isn't. This thing has never produced anything, no matter how much we weeded or fertilized. But the persimmon tree we know will do good, because those persimmon trees load up with hundreds of persimmons every year. Now the reason we're doing the good thing about the box is that it holds everything in, because whatever you pour in there is going to stay in there. And in fact, you see that little tin can lid over there? That's because somebody accidentally threw a tin can lid in my compost bucket. Now right here we've got a mulberry tree, and it's probably as big as nearly every mulberry tree out here, and even bigger, and it's only a year old. Or other mulberry trees that are this size are 3 or 4 years old, and that's all because we're able to put our fertilizer, our natural rotting compost, directly in this box. Now we think of this as a different growing environment. Here's a pomegranate, and here we have a plum. And here we have a peach, and I didn't plant this peach. This peach was actually planted by squirrels who ate the peaches off of this tree and simply dropped the peach pit down in that box. And here is a Japanese plum. And as I said earlier, we pretty much have planted a tree in every environment that we have. So we've got Japanese plums growing in wetlands directly in the sun, and we have them on dry areas directly in the sun. We have planted in wet areas under the shade and dry areas under the shade. And we find that Japanese plums do not do good anywhere where it's wet, but they do like the sun and they do like the shade. And now we're going to find out if they like this box. When I spoke about the squirrels planting my peaches from this tree, they've done that quite a bit. In fact, even though there is a peach in this box next to this peach tree, there is also another peach between these two boxes. And this year, lo and behold, I found this peach tree, which is actually ready to start producing peaches. We fully expect to get peaches off of that tree next year, and we did not plant it. In fact, we didn't plant the mother tree. This was actually something that came up in a compost pile that we used to have here. All right, there's some cactus growing in there. And in fact, if you look at these boxes, it's only every other box that has a large fruit tree, for the most part, except for the one that the squirrels planted. The boxes in between have very low types of plants. This is a pineapple, guava. We really don't know how big that gets, but all the ones I've seen in videos are very small, so it's planted between 2 trees. There's a fig tree that may get big, and another fig tree that may get big. Now, some of these boxes are empty, and we've got plans to plant some citrus in a couple of those boxes. But citrus never does very well through the winter, and so if it's going to die, that's when it's going to die, and it's this fall, so there's no point in putting a baby citrus tree in the ground when winter's right around the corner. But on the very first day that I'm certain that there is going to be no frost whatsoever, we're going to go ahead and plant some citrus in there. Now, this is a citrus tree, somewhat, but not really. I planted something here, I don't even remember what it was, but it died because of a freeze, hard freeze. And this is what came up off of the rootstock. I've seen this before. Anytime that you have these teeny tiny leaves coming off a citrus tree, that is not a citrus tree. That's going to grow a thing that's about the size of a golf ball and extremely hard and filled with seeds. I mean, just completely filled. Every space inside of the skin will be seeds, but it'll have juice around it, and the juice is going to be so acidic that it'll burn you if you cut that thing open. And I suspect, I've never tried this, but I suspect you could take just a few drops in a glass of water with some sugar and make lemonade from those things. But other than that, I can't think of anything that you can do as far as food goes. You may use the seeds to plant other rootstocks to graft to, but very limited what you can do with something like that. Now, this was a flowering weeping mulberry, and it died because of the freeze. And what has come up from the rootstock is an actual mulberry, so that should eventually give us some berries. And in fact, we have seen 2 or 3 berries on this before. So they're from something that was just an ornamental, we have actually got something that could potentially produce food. Now, back to these boxes. This pear tree is very, very new. I planted this thing in the spring, and guess what? It gave us some pears. Well, it gave my squirrels some pears, didn't give me any pears. And once again, tall fruit tree, and next to it in the box is cactus. And these can get tall, but we've got a long wait before that happens. And there's another pear tree, and it also produced fruit. Now, over here, if you are able to identify trees, you know that none of this produces fruit. And that is one of the things I'm trying to get going again. I want my lawn area to eventually look like my woods area. When we went through Hurricane Katrina, and when Hurricane Katrina was over, the Federal Emergency Management Agency offered to come out here, send the Corps of Engineers out here to cut down all of the trees that were dangerous, potentially dangerous trees that were falling over. So we also had hundreds of trees on the ground. Now, they wouldn't go out into the woods, but around my house, they cut down cut up all the trees that were down. But then they took their dozers and knocked down every other tree we had. So we ended up with a lawn where we didn't want one. This was originally woods, just like my back. It was a big mistake to get the Corps of Engineers out here. I could have eventually got this straightened out. But, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. And down here is another citrus tree, and I am going to show you what I mean about rootstocks. This tree died all the way down. Last year it came up as the same thing as that other one, the little teeny tiny leaves, but this year I noticed some big leaves. So I came along and I cut all the rootstock growth off. So all of this stuff you see down here is coming up as the teeny tiny leaf things. In fact, here's some pieces of what I cut off as I was cutting away with my loppers, trying to get farther and farther down, closer to the ground. I really was kind of thinking that this would kill the tree, but I'm going to keep doing this and hopefully get rid of all of those over time so that the part that produces fruit will dominate this plant. Now, there are some basic principles that I try to stick to as I'm creating this little fantasy land of mine, which is actually a reality. One thing is, you don't want to have all of the same stuff. You want to try to get as much variety as possible. I might have, and I can't remember exactly what I used to have, but I know it's more now. But say citrus trees. I know I have like 25 to 50 citrus trees, but I don't have 25 or 50 orange trees, and I certainly don't have them all planted together. I've got all them citrus planted throughout my acreage, with as much variety as possible. And what that does, it keeps you from getting bored. You know, in civilization, we have what's called monocultures, where you try to capture a market. Like if your thing is navel oranges, then you grow as many navel oranges as you can, trying to make them all look identical. We have nothing like that going on here. I got them spread out like I'm passing a citrus tree now, but over there is a peach tree, and there's a pear tree. And the citrus trees I have, like oranges, I may have, I don't know, 10 orange trees, but they're Moro blood oranges, they're navel oranges, they're standard blood oranges, they're navel blood oranges, Valencia oranges, Louisiana sweet, Hanlon oranges, and then that's just the oranges. We got lemon trees, and that means all different varieties of lemon trees, all different varieties of limes and grapefruits and kumquats. And I can do that because I have a large lot. But if you, and I do that with everything. But if you've got a very small lot, then you're going to have to go by a little bit different principles than what I go by. Here in these woods is another pomegranate tree, and it kind of looks a lot like the things that are around here, like tie and wax myrtle. So it's kind of camouflaged, even though it's growing there. Now, I've never gotten pomegranates off of any of my pomegranate trees, and some of my pomegranates are pretty big, but I have seen or heard stories of pomegranates growing like crazy down here in zone 8B9A. And so, and the people I heard the stories from were very, very reliable. In fact, one of the people told me that they had them, and I went and looked, and I saw the flowers, and later when I went back I saw little pomegranates, but I've never seen full-size pomegranates anywhere, but I suspect those little ones got full size. This odd looking plant is Sesbania or Sesbania, about to go dormant. This particular one is Sesbania vesicaria, or what they call bladder pod. This is a very sickly looking one, but look at how much beans it's produced. Now when these things turn completely brown, the beans will drop, which means that you can lay them out somewhere on a sheet, and once they're ready to drop, just shake them and collect the beans up and eat them. Now they're listed as poison, but I looked them up, and the poison that they're listed as containing is the same poison that red beans and pinto beans contain. I have collected enough of these to boil myself up a bowl of the dry beans, and it tasted just like pinto beans. So I suspect that this is a bean. It's listed as poisonous because anybody can grow it. It replants itself and grows back every year without any work, any fertilizer, any watering. It's basically free pinto beans. Now these are a few Sesbania vesicarias that are growing in my yard between my gate and my house. They're kind of in a way. I'm not going to let this happen again because it was kind of a hassle. Plus, the vesicaria that's growing everywhere else is enough, and I'm going to pull these up and actually plant the beans in a different area. So I'll have more than enough without having any growing here between me and my door. What I have here is nothing but pears. I don't have all the same pear. They're all different. That right there I think is a kefir. Kefir is a self-pollinating. We get pears off of that every year, or at least the squirrels do. And then through here we've got other kinds of pears. There's a hood pear, and there's Asian pear. I got one that says it's oriental pears. I suspect that oriental pear and Asian pear may be just two different names for the same thing. Logic doesn't dictate that, but it does. It is indicative of that. And the reason we have so many pears in one area is because when I first started this project, I planted one area with 6 different varieties of tree, and 5 of those varieties died and the one lived, and it was a Japanese persimmon. So I planted that whole area in Japanese persimmons because I knew that they would live there. And later on, when I planted a pear tree over here, it did very well. So we thought it might be a good policy to just plant this area in nothing but pears. Since then, we've put a few other things in. We've put in a Japanese plum that has not done well at all. This plum tree has been here a long time. If it would die, I would plant something else there, but as long as it's alive, I'm not going to cut it down. But it's pretty old. But just a little way away from that, we've got this Japanese plum that's doing quite well. It's not growing as quickly as some of our others, but as I said earlier, we like to plant every variety of tree in every variety of soil and just see what happens. But When they die, we don't replace them with the same tree. We always pick something else. Now this is a pecan tree, and I'm going to show you something about grafts. Pecan trees are always grafted to pecan trees, but when you plant a pecan as a seed, what you grow is going to produce something that you can't depend on. This might be teeny tiny, might be really big, very delicious, but you really don't know, and it takes about 30 years to start getting nuts off of a nut tree. So it's a lot to invest in something you're not sure of. So what we do is we take those pecans we plant, when they get a certain size, we cut them off, and we tape, and I'm literally mean tape, a known variety. In other words, we take a limb from a tree that produces nice pecans, and we graft it to the top of something that we're unsure of. And you can usually tell a grafted tree because there usually is some kind of profound difference in the root. In fact, that isn't the, there's where it was glued together. In fact, look, the tape is still on it. I was showing you the wrong thing. There you go, that's grafting tape, and that is your graft. Now there are trees that in this country don't really grow, and we graft them to native species, and the bark on the graft will be different than the bark on the rootstock, and it's even more profound than that. If you have a very small lot, then you need to know that not all trees will produce fruit. And a good example of that would be persimmons. If you have American persimmons, the male persimmon tree will pollinate the female persimmon tree, but it won't produce fruit itself. But if you were to grow an American persimmon tree in your yard and you lived in, you were surrounded by woods similar to the woods I got, that's not really a problem, because the woods can take care of your male persimmon trees. There'll be plenty of them out there, so you don't have to worry about growing both. You just grow the female. And usually if you purchase an American persimmon tree, it is grafted with a female top. So you're going to get a female tree. But that says if you have a small lawn, you don't want to have the males in your yard because they won't produce anything for you. And it's the same thing with blueberries. If you got blueberries, blueberries require a pollinator. But where I live, a lot of people have blueberries, so I really don't think I need a pollinator. If I just had one blueberry bush, I'm pretty sure it would produce. Plus, a naturalist, a certified naturalist, told me once that huckleberries and wild blueberries will pollinate your regular blueberries. And I don't know of any area in the southeastern United States that doesn't have wild blueberries and huckleberries growing everywhere. That's a wild huckleberry right there, and there's another one, and there's another one. So we know that if we just had one blueberry, we're almost for sure going to get blueberries off of it. Plus, I know that some of my neighbors have regular cultivated blueberries. So if you're growing stuff that needs a pollinator, it's a good idea to make sure you've got neighbors that have pollinator plants, or if that there are pollinator plants in the woods. What we have here is a plum. It's a wild plum. Now, before I planted this wild plum, I planted several cultivated plums, and in all the time I've been doing this, I've only seen one plum off of one tree. It may not be a very good thing for me to grow. But these wild plums are free. I found them about 75 miles north of here. The man that owned the property said that they loaded down with plums every year, but I have not seen one yet. And this seems to me to be big enough to be carrying plums by now. But as you can see from the base, the single plant that I put in the ground has multiplied. Hopefully they'll make some fruit, and even if it takes another 5-6 years, that'll be fine. But if it never makes fruit, I'll just keep this piece of land that it's taken up open for other planting. In other words, after so much time, I may cut this down and plant something here that'll be more productive. Now, I'm not going to cut down every plum I got, but certainly if plums don't produce here, I don't need more than 1 or 2. If we come over here, we'll see something that's a sure thing. This is a winter in the southeastern United States. Always produces, and I said winter, not winter. Blueberries just naturally love the acidic soil of this part of the world, and they don't need any water and don't need any fertilizer. But if you got a little compost, put them around them, it doesn't hurt. This is my oldest one. We get plenty of blueberries off of them, and this line goes all the way down 2 sides of my property. These are all blueberries. Now I've seen blueberries form into a hedge, and the reason I planted them here because this is the far side of the easement that separates my property from my neighbor's property. That's actually on my neighbor's property. He has complained about me planting on his side of the line, and I don't really understand that concept, but certainly if he came over and cut them all down, there wouldn't be a thing I could do about it. Eventually this will just look like the rest of the woods. Only difference being it'll be covered with food. He'll probably be happy about it by then. But then again, maybe not. Never can tell about folks. Now, once we get to the end of my property line here, go across, I've got another line of these things going down this fence. And actually I planted the blueberries before the fence was put up. When the fence was put up, I went ahead and planted some trees along the fence. That's a Japanese plum. We got a different tree at nearly every post on this fence, and then out here about 10 feet from it or 8 feet from it, got another row of blueberries. There are a total of 150 blueberry bushes on this property and they seem to do really, really good. Here is a live oak. Normally nothing grows next to a live oak, but look at that. That blueberry plant is right there next to it, and eventually, within the next 5 years or so, this whole area between these two blueberry plants will be filled up with blueberry plants. They just propagate that easily. In fact, the best way to, or the most easiest way to propagate these is wait for a runner to come off of the root and just separate that from the rest of the blueberry bush, and after it becomes healthy again, dig it up. Here's one right here that's got runners coming off of it. That's the plant that I planted, and way over here is one that has come up from a runner. At least I believe that's what happened. That definitely is a blueberry, and I didn't plant it there. All of these blueberries are bent over because the sun is in the south, and that's the direction they're pointing. When we were up in the front, I told you that I planted my first Japanese persimmon up front, and it did good, so I planted everything around there in Japanese persimmons. Also, when I planted my first pear tree in a good place, and it did well, I went ahead and planted a whole bunch more pear trees around it, because that one tree doing well was indicative of the fact that pears themselves in general would do well. This area is completely filled with wild blueberries or huckleberries or whatever you want to call them. Some people make a distinction. I just think of them as the same thing. That being the case, I have started planting cultivated blueberries in here, because if wild blueberries do well, I imagine the cultivated kind will too. When I said that this part of my property grew blueberries very well, and that I was going to kind of put a bunch of blueberries in here, this is one of the reasons that I say blueberries grow very well here. This is a blueberry bush. I call it a bird blueberry because it's about 20 feet tall. All of the berries are on top where only birds can get them. And I want you to see the size of this trunk. If you notice, it's a double trunk. So this, you could put a tire swing in this blueberry bush. I've been told it's not a blueberry or a huckleberry, but a completely different species of bush. But the leaves look like blueberry leaves. The bark looks like blueberry bark, and the berries taste like blueberries. I might be wrong, but I think it's a different variety. I don't believe it's a different species. If you have a very small plot and you live in a neighborhood where nobody has trees and you're not surrounded by woods, then what you might need to do is just get self-pollinating trees. Those are trees that put on male flowers and female flowers, but put them on at the same time, because a lot of things put on male and female flowers, but they put them on at different times, and that's why you need a pollinator. And so if you get these self-pollinating trees, you don't need to worry about if your neighbors have anything or if your woods have anything, because you're set. But there are other trees that put on male and female flowers that put them on at different times, and you got to make sure your neighbors have them, but they have to be close neighbors. Like pecan trees. A pecan tree is wind pollinated. So if you are living in a neighborhood where everybody has a pecan tree, you're okay. But if you're living in a neighborhood where somebody several hundred feet away has a pecan tree, that ain't going to work, because the wind won't carry enough pollen over there to make it worth your while. Pecan trees are very, very large when they're mature. They take up a whole lot of space. They put out a lot of shade. And in general, if you have one, it's going to keep you from growing about 8 or 9 fruit trees, which don't take up much space. So you got to use that kind of reasoning when you're figuring out what you're going to plant. Now here's another pecan tree, and we actually have planted our pecan trees so that they're close enough to each other that they can pollinate each other, but they're not going to be perfectly efficient at that because we have so many other kinds of trees here. We really don't want to cover our whole property in pecan trees, but we keep them relatively close to one another, and if the wind is blowing the right direction, they will pollinate one another. But we didn't keep track of what varieties we were putting up. Let me get around the other side of the sunshine here. This is another pecan tree, and this is actually planted in the area we first started planting in where everything died. But we never tried a pecan tree. We tried about 6 different varieties of fruit tree and have not planted any other fruit trees in here with the exception of a native mulberry. And the reason for that is I found a mulberry tree out in the woods growing in standing water. So it gave me confidence that a mulberry tree could grow here in this spot that was only wet part of the year. And here's the mulberry tree. This is another one. This was bigger than that other one. But this mulberry tree, I think it was also planted from a weeping mulberry that doesn't produce fruit. And we've got plenty of fruit off of this because the weeping mulberry on this tree died just like the other one. And you can actually see down at the base where the original weeping mulberry, which is an ornamental, was growing. And it died, and I cut it off, and all this other stuff came up from the rootstock. Once again, a rootstock that produces better than the actual tree. And speaking of rootstocks, I'm going to show you another example, very easy to see. This is a Japanese persimmon, produces plenty of fruit, and you can see there's a very odd configuration here at the bottom where it's glued to this rootstock. The rootstock is very big, the tree itself is very small. This is actually a very sick tree, so it doesn't like being in the direct sunlight. At least that's my theory on it. But that's okay, because even if it dies, we're always planting. There will be something to take its place when that time comes. Over here we've got another Japanese persimmon that died. If you notice, there is no difference between the rootstock and the trunk of the tree. That's because the Japanese part died, and it was so young that when the rootstock started producing, it just came out as an American persimmon tree. So that's what we were able to figure out, that Japanese persimmons are grafted to American persimmon trees, which makes perfect sense. And fortunately for us, well, I mean, we never cut the tree down because we didn't want to, but it's producing American persimmons. Very small, very little fruit, but it's very sweet. And as long as you don't pick it before it's ripe, if this stuff is green, you put it in your mouth, it will really hurt you because it's very astringent. In fact, it's like a regular typical trick that 6-year-olds play on 5-year-olds. You know, the big kid always will trick a little kid into biting this just so his mouth will shrivel up. But there's another one. And like I said, if it was a male, this wouldn't have anything on it, but I probably wouldn't cut it down. Now, these trees are really known for putting out shoots. In other words, it puts a root out, and that root follows the ground over, and eventually other trees come up off of that. And if you take a shovel and cut all the way around that, by next year that'll be its own tree. That is a little bitty persimmon tree, very likely coming off of this tree, which means that since this tree is a female, this tree will be a female. And eventually, these are so close together, eventually I'll probably have to cut that down. But it doesn't make a difference because this thing puts off hundreds of these, and they come up every year. It's not a big deal. I'll just leave some of the others up. Now, the area I'm walking through probably looks like woods for most people, but it's really more like a lawn. And when I buy a citrus tree or a pear tree or a peach tree, I experiment. I'll take and put one out here in what's like a lawn, you know, direct sunlight, in a dry spot. And since I live in a swampy area, I've got plenty of spaces that are dry and plenty of spaces that are wet. So I'll put another one out on the lawn in a wet spot. Then I'll go back out in the woods and put one in the shade on a dry spot. and in the shade on a wet spot. And then depending on what lives and what dies and how good they do, that's how I make my decisions about where to plant stuff. And if I have something die that I plant, and it's pretty reasonable to assume that it died because I planted it where it didn't want to be, then I'll replant that area, but I won't replant with the same thing that died there. I'll find something that's a little bit more able to deal with those conditions. This is my my oldest Japanese plum, and it's got flowers starting on it. In fact, you can see some of them are even starting to blossom. Problem with that is if they don't get their fruit to set before a freeze, then you don't get any fruit. Since we've got the flowers and they're doing good, all we have to do is hope that it doesn't freeze before the fruit sets, and next spring we'll have plenty of fruit. Now this is one of those trees that is hit or miss for me. In zone 9, I could probably get fruit maybe once every 2 or 3 years. If I lived in zone 8, it'd probably be once every 5 years. Zone 7 would put me down at maybe once every decade or so. So this is not something, a lot of times a tree will grow and be very, very healthy, but you'll never get fruit off of it because the freeze will hit it before the flowers are ready. And the same can be said if you live down too far south. You may have a tree that's very beautiful but never puts on fruit because it doesn't get enough chill hours. This is the theory that some trees actually have a genetically predisposed to count somehow the amount of hours of chill it gets to determine if winter is over. Once the tree determines that winter's over, it'll put out flowers. But sometimes if you live in the wrong environment, your tree will put out flowers before it's ready. Another freeze will hit and it'll be done. Or as where I live, there's never enough chill hours, so the plants never put any flowers on at all. This is a Japanese plum. It's growing pretty deep in the woods, but it ain't as deep as it was once. I have been clearing closer and closer to this. This is the first year that I've been able to actually get a good look at it because I've cleared out so much, and we will continue to do so in order to make sure that this gets enough sun to produce fruit. The reason I planted that there is for the same reason that I planted this Japanese plum right here and that Japanese plum right there, as well as all of these Japanese plums. I probably have about 12 Japanese plums out here growing in the same area. Of course, there's a orange tree and there's a peach tree, so we don't just have Japanese plums here. But the reason I planted these here is because the first one I planted was this one, and look how good it's doing. Now this thing was completely surrounded by woods last year, and so for the last 2 or 3 years it's been in the ground. It has been reaching frantically for the sun, which it's getting pretty successful at. It's almost there. Sad thing is, most of the fruit that this is going to produce will be way up there. I don't know of a whole lot of things that eat it. I know I like to eat it, and I'm not up there. So we'll probably eventually get some of this stuff cleared out that's growing around this tree so that it can put out some fruit a little bit lower. But we may not cut that top part off. There's really no reason for me to have 50 Japanese plums producing at the same time. I can only eat and dry so much of this. Next to the Japanese plums is, like I said, a bunch of different fruits. And in fact, this whole woods, if you walk around, which this woods just looks like woods, is filled with things that produce fruit. But even when they're loaded with fruit from a distance, this just looks like woods. So I don't have to worry so much about my neighbors coming over here and killing me to eat the fruit on my trees in the woods. They may do so to get to the fruit that's in my yard, because that's going to be pretty easy to spot until that yard turns into woods. But eventually it'll all be woods around here. No one will have a clue that this has anything to do with food, because people by tradition only associate food with farms and orchards, which are very easy to spot. This video, although it is just a standard issue sustenance and cover and permaculture walk around video, I'm making this for a very specific purpose. I had a viewer watching my video asking me what should I plant for a permaculture forest, and I wrote him back and says, well, it depends on where you live. I can't recommend what I'm planting because it may not work in your part of the country. What zone are you in? He says, I'm in zone number 9A, 8B, because I'm right on the border. Well, guess what? Sustenance and covering is in zone 9A, and zone 8B is about 5 miles that way. So it could be said that I live on the border of 8B and 9A as well. And since in the past we didn't have A's and B's, it could be said that I live in zone 9 and zone 8. I'm very glad that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has determined that those zones could be split and be a little bit more specific. But if you're watching this video and you live in zone 8 or zone 9, most of what I'm going to show you will work here. Something that I'm really known for is my fig trees. These fig trees, I did a video about them a while back, and they're really tall. They put out so many figs. I got about 12 gallons of figs this year, but I've got about 12 fig trees, so it's only 1 gallon per tree. Now these things are kind of out of control. They're rubbing up against the roof. A lot of what grows on them I can't pick. They're getting really fat and spread out, which means they take up a lot more space than they need to. So I'm going to cut all of these limbs off until they are even with that handrail up there. And I know that sounds kind of drastic, maybe not the best solution, but we'll just walk over here and show you what these things look like. These are the fig trees I've already cut down. And it's been about 3 weeks, maybe a month since I cut these down, and I cut them down all the way around the house. And I didn't want to cut them down at that time, but the insurance company needed photographs of the house, and they couldn't take any photographs because there was just too much foliage, so I had to do a lot of cutting around here. But if you notice, after only 3 weeks, maybe a month at the most, they're coming back like crazy. Everywhere you see a leaf is going to be a limb next year, and these things grow extremely fast. So I got 12 gallons of figs this year. I'll probably get 12 or more gallons next year, even though I cut all of these figs back. Now I've got other figs that I haven't cut back, and look, they've got their second crop on them. I know that I'll never ever get to eat those figs because it'll get too cold for them to develop. If you've got a really long growing season like South Florida, those figs would actually mature and you would get a crop. Oh, there's one that's ripe. But anyways, yeah, you can get 3 crops off of a fig tree, I do believe, if you're far enough south. But I only get one crop I can eat and a crop I can't eat. This area looks terrible, and the reason for that is it's very wet. And the stuff that's in here is very woody, so I have to time it perfectly. If I'm going to mow this, I have to mow it when the ground is dry and the stuff ain't too big. Right now the ground is dry, but the stuff is too big. So I was unable to get to it this year. Hopefully it'll stay dry through the winter. At the end of winter I'll be able to get in there. This is a pecan tree. It's not the only thing I have in there. There's a lemon tree over here that was doing really good, but one of my neighbors came down here and just hacked it all to pieces, and it's barely alive. I don't think I'm ever going to get another lemon off of it. And we got about maybe 50, 75 lemons last time we picked off of it. That's a mulberry tree, doing very good, because this used to be where we would have the county throw its wood chips. In there is also some Japanese persimmons, and there's some banana trees. But I got to tell you, with banana trees, if you live anywhere north of zone 10, you're never going to get bananas. I've heard so many people tell me about all the bananas they got off their trees. I think they're basically liars, because I have never seen a banana ripen to maturity in this far south or this far north. A banana tree is not like a regular tree. It's more like a plant because it doesn't have a woody trunk. In fact, if you go to Green Dean's channel, which is called Eat the Weeds, and I think he has a eattheweeds.com, he shows you what you can do with this. I know that you can eat the leaves because I've seen them for sale in grocery stores. But I also know that the trunk can be eaten because I've eaten them. You know, you can take a machete and cut this thing down to the roots. In fact, it's probably a good idea to do that once they die. And they will die. And it doesn't have to be 32 degrees. We've gone down into like 40 degrees. And our banana trees have died. So once they die, you need to just cut them down with a machete. That way they'll come back healthier next year. And we do that. Sometimes we do it and sometimes we don't. And I can see a difference. If you cut them down, they do better. Back in this area, it stays wet most of the time, And I'd heard that taro was grown in wet areas, and so we planted some taro. Taro is, if you live anywhere around here, you've probably seen something like this before, and you call it elephant ears. Well, those are elephant ears, and they are taro, but the root is so small, it's like the size of a pencil, that by the time you peel it, there's nothing left. So it's really not an edible food. If you eat this raw, it's not an edible food because it's deadly poisonous. But when you heat it, it transforms the acids that are in the taro root into elements that are not dangerous. In fact, it's mostly carbohydrates. The roots get as big as either, depending on the variety, as big as a golf ball or as big as a softball. And I've got both. And it tastes like potatoes. It's got a little bit different texture than potatoes, but it does have very similar nutritional value. This plants itself over and over and over again. In fact, I planted some of this when I was like 10 years old. And my mom still complains about it because no matter how much she mows it, it comes back every year. Of course, the stuff I planted was our regular elephant ears. Doesn't have any nutritional value. There's a cypress, bald cypress tree here that was like a little stick when I planted it. And it's getting really, really big. And the reason I planted that isn't because of food, but simply because I like variety. I don't have any bald cypress growing here. And it will provide shade for my taro, my mulberry, and my Japanese persimmon. And I've actually got a really nice, pretty Japanese persimmon way back in there, but we're not going to walk up to it. You've already seen Japanese persimmons. This tree is not a fruit tree. It's a weeping willow. Most people would recognize it as a weeping willow. And right behind it is a really, really huge swamp willow. Those swamp willows grew so quick, and my wife really loves weeping willows, so I thought maybe the weeping willow will grow quick. Sure enough, we planted this in the ground a couple of years ago. It's really big. From what I've been able to determine, around here, the best trees to grow for quick shade are weeping willows if you have wet land, and sycamores if you have dry land. The good thing about weeping willows, and I'm going to demonstrate this to you in a minute, is that you can take one limb, like this, a little bitty limb, cut it off, and cut it into about 6-inch sections. Make sure to keep track of which end is down and which end is up. Stick the down end in some dirt, keep it moist, and it will quickly put on roots. In fact, there is a belief amongst some people that the hormone in weeping willows will allow other trees to grow roots, but I have tried getting the hormone out of the tree. I've also purchased the powdered hormone at regular nursery stores, and I can tell you that I have experienced no difference in results. Most trees that will root. Most trees that will not root, and so you just have to learn which ones are which. But I'm going to go ahead and show you some weeping willows that I planted or stuck in dirt about a year ago and have since put into the ground. I put this one in the ground a year ago, and it's actually 2 trees. I don't know if I put 2 trees in or if it's already put off shoots and it's starting to grow its own separate brother or sister tree. But look over here, this thing goes all the way up in there and back down the ground. That's why they call it a weeping willow. But that is about, it's easily 4 feet tall, probably 4.5 feet tall. Here's another one. And these trees are less than a year old from a stick that was smaller than a pencil. Here's another example. And back by the little orange flag is another example. And there is another example right there. And these are going to produce a lot of shade, which is a good thing. Fruit trees don't do good in direct sunlight, but they also don't do very well in really, really dense darkness. These are taro plants that grow the really, really large roots. The taro plants I showed you earlier have the small roots, and I purchased those at an Asian grocery store. When you purchase them, you have to make sure that the tops and bottoms have not been cut off and that there is some green sprout somewhere on the plant. And that's where I get most of my taro root is at the grocery store. It's extremely cheap, and if you get them like I tell you, the little green spot on them, they always grow. These are the larger version, and even though they sell the larger version at the Asian market, they always have them on the shelf with the tops and bottoms cut off. They won't grow, usually. If you can find one that hasn't been cut and has a green spot, grab it. And some of them actually get really, really big, like they're the size of a softball, but they're about a foot long. These I actually purchased at Walmart. They're marketed as mammoth elephant ears or gigantic elephant ears, and they're usually about $3 a root. And I did plant quite a few in here. Many of them did not make it, but the ones that did are making plenty of babies, as you can see under here. Since this is a wet area, I only grow things that do good in wet areas. Here we have sweet bay, which came up on its own, and it doesn't look like the sweet bay you buy at the store. It's the same stuff, it's just got a bigger leaf, and so even though it smells and tastes the same, you won't see those on your grocer's shelf. Just to give you a basic idea of how quick taro grows, my friend came over about a month ago and told me that I needed to plant taro in this dry creek bed while it was dry, so that when it filled up again, the taro would have a good start. And that taro right there was planted about 2 weeks ago. That's how quick this stuff grows. And I've planted, I think I had about 30 or 40 taro roots that I planted, and I planted them all the way down this creek. And I know for a fact that the ones I've seen growing in ditches before absolutely take over. So if you've got some kind of feature like this, even if it's just a regular dug drainage ditch, taro root will do very good there. But it doesn't seem to do very good much farther north than zone 8. And I'm in zone 9A. This is another version of Sesbania or Sesbania. It's called grandiflora. It makes a lot of flowers. They call it hummingbird tree. It just came up, and even though you really can't do anything with it, it's pretty, so we will pull this up and make sure to plant all of the seeds on there in the same area where we're planting our regular Sesbania vesicaria, which is the bladder pod. There's also another one that makes a seed a little bit smaller called a rattlebox. And I had some of that growing here, but it didn't come back, so we're not going to concern ourselves with it. If I ever see another rattlebox somewhere, I'll pull it up at harvest time and bring it over here and get it going again. All of these Sesbanias are ready to be pulled up and planted, but even if they just drop their seeds where they are, it's okay, because this is the area where we will be planting them. And when it rains, the water flows through here, and these seeds are on their way to being planted with or without my care. This stuff growing in here is goldenrod. Goldenrod is, you know, the leaves you can take and pull this thing up out of the ground and hang it somewhere to dry, and you can use the leaves to make a tea. The stuff next to it is called dog fennel, and it tastes like fennel, very, very wispy. And I've ate it before, cooked, you know, using it as a seasoning, but they say it's poisonous, and I'm not aware of what the poison is or how to counter it or if it's got long-lasting effects. Apparently, depending on what you think about my health, this stuff has either made me very sick or hasn't affected me at all. This is this is called Morning Glory. And Morning Glory grows wild, but these are actually ones that I purchased at the store because they make really, really huge flowers. And the flowers always have psychedelic names because the seeds actually have a psychotropic effect. You can make yourself eat the leaves cooked, and this is like part of the sweet potato family, so it also makes a root that's edible. So, you know, just keep in mind that, and I don't know which ones are which, or which ones are the most beneficial, but I know that sometimes you dig them up and the roots are so small they're worthless. But Native Americans used to eat these things, and it talked about the roots being like 40 pounds. So just keep that in mind, that even morning glories can produce food. And they have pretty flowers. They can choke things out, and I think one of the names for morning glory is like chokeweed or strangleweed or something like that, because it will crawl around on other things and choke them out. This one I don't think will. It doesn't look quite as dangerous as the morning glories that just come up on their own. This area is actually the area we call the woods. A lot of people call it a forest, but I don't think a forest is an appropriate name for something like this, because we've only got about maybe 25-foot canopy here, and I think of a forest as something with 100-foot or more canopy. An old growth forest is something with 400-foot or more canopy. And so in any case, this doesn't look like a lawn. What I have up front doesn't really look like a lawn either to my neighbors, but to most people you can see there is a distinct difference between where we were just now and where we are at this moment. This is truly the woods, and the woods are really good for fruit trees because the woods produce thousands of different varieties of leaves to fall on the ground and thousands of different things to feed animals, which attracts thousands of different animals which poop on the ground. So this piece of land will always fertilize itself. Not only that, because of the little bit of canopy we got, it kind of holds in the moisture. So even during a drought, you won't lose the trees that you will lose in your lawn. And it really doesn't take any effort to grow things out here. This area obviously is not quite as open as the area that I call my yard. But this is the way my yard used to look before FEMA came in here and took out all of the dangerous trees, along with all of the undangerous trees and all of the beneficial trees. And you know, there's benefits to having shade, but there's also some negative aspects of it, because sometimes trees will not produce fruit in the shady areas, so the tree will go all the way as tall as the rest of these trees and put all of its fruit up in the sky where you can't reach it. But for the most part, everything you plant is going to benefit you. This is a really huge variety of trees, which attracts a huge variety of animals. All of those animals are dropping their feces. All of these trees are dropping their leaves. So you don't just get one kind of thing producing the chemicals that go into your ground. And pretty much everything loves variety. So if you plant a fruit tree in here, if it doesn't get killed by, you know, too much fertilizer, it's really going to grow and benefit from the thick layer of mulch that's laying on this ground. This is another pineapple guava. This area where this pineapple guava is growing is really wet most of the time, so these will grow in the wet and the dry, because this is what I showed you over in that growing box up on top of the hill. Next to it, we've got a native species of the Louisiana swamps. It's called mayhaw. If you have hawthorns, that's the family this is in, because mayhaw is short for May hawthorn. They grow little things. It's kind of like a crab apple. In fact, people use them for jelly like they do for a crab apple. And I can grow them. A lot of people can't grow them because their ground ain't wet enough. Over this way, we've got a plant called quince. And I don't know what quince is. I've looked at pictures of it. It looks like a pear. I've been told that they got a lot of fibers in them, so you can eat them all you want, but you're going to have to spit something out because it's not all edible. Kind of like sugar cane. Just chew it and get the juice and then spit it. But other people have told me that they have eaten quince all the way down to the core, and other people say that even when it's stringy, you can cook it and eat the whole thing. These are all Japanese persimmons, and I've already talked about them, but I thought I'd better stop back over here because I just realized I still got one piece of fruit on my tree. Squirrels didn't find it at first, but I guarantee you they'll find it before it's ready to eat. This plant is called Pawpaw. We have quite a few of them out here. I'd never heard of pawpaws growing in this part of the world, but when I did find out that that was a pawpaw, and the reason I found out is I saw some fruit on it, I was horrified because I had been cutting down pawpaws for years and years with my mower, and I figured I had thrown away a treasure of food. Well, believe it or not, even though I had spent years cutting them down, they just kept coming up. I've counted these several times, and I've come up with a figure of about 50, and then at other times I've come up with a figure of about 100. It seemed like it was 91 that I counted, and probably closer to 91 because I was really careful the time that I did that. But these things are really doing well, and I don't know how they even got here. People talk about birds. Well, yeah, I understand that, but our soil in this area is not really supposed to be supportive of pawpaws. If you look at any map of where pawpaws grow, we are not on it, but they're running all through these woods. And in fact, because of that, use the same policy. If these wild pawpaws will do good out here, then maybe a cultivated pawpaw from the store will do good out here. So I've purchased 2 of them, and here's 2 of them together. And the one to your right is cultivated. If you notice, the leaves are much larger than these wild pawpaws to the left. The wild pawpaws have been producing fruit for a couple of years now, normally about as big as my thumb. According to all the research I've done on the internet, these pawpaws produce a piece of fruit about as big as your fist. I'm hoping I get a whole bunch of both one day. So once again, if you look at this, it just looks like the woods, but we're going to go ahead and point out a bunch of stuff in real quick fashion. Well, that right there is a pawpaw. This is a huckleberry. There's a couple of more pawpaws. This is a pear tree. Next to it is a pomegranate. I've got a few pomegranates out here. This is citrus. Now, it's gotten very damaged by frost, but it is not the rootstock. That actually is a citrus tree, and it was some kind of an orange. Over here we've got another kind of orange, and it was not damaged by the frost. I was told when I planted this thing I was making a big mistake because I put it on a pile of dirt, and I was told that if it's up there it's not going to get enough water. Well, guess what? This is one of my healthiest citrus trees out in the woods, and as you can see, it is in pretty deep shade and yet still doing good. I suspect that all of these trees around it is what helped it to get through the frost that a lot of them didn't make it through. This is an American beautyberry. Now, why it's called an American beautyberry may not seem easy to figure out right now, but I'm going to show you some other ones growing a little bit away from here. This is all American beautyberries growing up underneath this live oak. There are very few edibles that will grow under live oak because the soil is so acidic. I am attempting to grow some blueberries right now and plan on planting quite a few under here because they do seem to do good with acidic soil. But this is what an American beautyberry is. And now you probably know why they got their name. Green Dean, who runs has a YouTube channel called Eat the Weeds. He also has eattheweeds.com, does a good story about these things. I never thought you could eat them. I've always been told they're poisonous, but you can make jelly with them. And in fact, I have just walked past and picked them and thrown them in my mouth. I didn't get sick from doing that. They didn't taste very good, but it is food. Won't kill you, and it'll work in an emergency. Just look at how many of these things we have here. If somebody were to come back here looking for food, and they didn't really know how to identify trees, there isn't much chance that they would figure out that I put any of this back here. But some things that are very small that I do not want to run over, and understand that I could easily do so if I didn't mark them, I have got marks on them. That there ribbon keeps me from mowing down that blueberry bush right there. But there are so many things growing here that I put here, but they don't look like I put them there. If you're looking through here, this little tree probably looks just like any other wild tree, but that is some kind of citrus. This citrus is not grafted. That means I planted it from a seed. I'm not worried about it coming back true. If you go to the store and you buy a grapefruit, you can believe that that grapefruit was grown inside of a 10,000 acre grapefruit farm. You're going to get a grapefruit from that seed. The chances of you getting anything else are nearly zero. Now, this tree, where it's growing, may put out a fruit that is half grapefruit and half orange if I planted it from something on my property, because I don't have all grapefruits out here. I've got many different kinds of citrus. In fact, citrus, just about any citrus across with any other citrus, you can get something as big as a grapefruit that tastes like a lemon, or you get something as little as a lemon that tastes like an orange. But that's only if you collect the seeds from your plants. If you collect seeds from fruit that you buy at the store, pretty much what you buy at the store is what's going to grow on your tree. A couple of years before we had the hard freeze, this tree really produced. Now, I don't remember how many fruits were on it, but it was like 7 or 10 or something like that. It wasn't hundreds. But we've gone 2 years now with no fruit whatsoever, simply because it was damaged so much during the frost. But I suspect if we get through this winter without a hard freeze, this tree will be producing next year, along with many of the citrus trees on this property. Here we have something called a jelly palm. It's just a regular palm tree, but they take so long to grow that I may not ever get to see this thing as a tree, but I may get to see fruit come off of it, because when it gets about 3 feet tall, it'll start putting out its first fruit. The fruit is very delicious, tastes like pineapple, about the size of my thumb. When we were kids, between eastbound and westbound lanes of Highway 90, they used these for decorations. The trouble was, people were picking the fruit, which really wasn't any trouble at all since there was hardly any traffic. And so the city went down and cut all of them down and planted a type of palm that didn't produce fruit. Another thing about the type they planted is it wouldn't survive cold weather. So those millions of dollars worth of trees all died very quickly. These don't look like they're doing too good, but I didn't plant these in a pot. I actually just stuck the seeds in the ground. That's some more Japanese plums. If this Japanese plum survives, it will probably do better than any other Japanese plum out here, simply because I did grow it directly from a seed planted in this ground. This is a pear tree. It looks very bad because it's doing very bad. It's planted way out in the woods. This is as far away from my house as I've planted anything. And because this pear tree is not doing any good, or very good, you'll notice that there aren't very many pear trees around here. Unlike my lawn, which has quite a few pear trees because they do so well, once I realized that that one wasn't doing well, I stopped planting them. There may be 10 pear trees out here in the woods. None of them really doing all that good. Some for obvious reasons. Here's one. And it's probably wouldn't be doing any good no matter what, but a tree fell down and it landed right through here. In fact, there's the stump of it over there. It came right through here and it broke the top off of this pear tree, and it broke the top off of this Japanese plum, if you can see there. But I pruned them back best I could. I got the tree all cut up and they seem to be doing a whole lot better now. They're both obviously alive. Another citrus tree, and just quite a few trees out here. Many fruit trees, and there'll continue to be more fruit trees. In fact, I'm going to be, look, this is a peach, and if you look at the surroundings, if you were walking through the woods and that was there, would you think that you had found food? Let me get it from the other side where we ain't got so much sunlight coming in. And that's a pretty healthy peach tree. I've actually planted quite a few peach trees back here that haven't done very well at all. But since I do have some that are doing good, I continue to plant them. In fact, all I have to do with peaches is plant the pits, and the pits are free since I've got, you know, peaches laying all over the ground during that time of the year. We'll probably end up with a forest filled with peaches. If you live far north of me or far south of me, in a zone 6 or a zone 11, it doesn't mean you can't grow what I'm growing here, but you're not going to be able to grow everything I'm growing here. Trees are completely unaware of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's zone numbering system, but they are not unaware of what they can and can't live in. So say you live south of me and you want to grow citrus trees, you'll actually do better than I do with citrus trees, because I'm pretty much on the outer limits of how far north a citrus tree will grow. But other trees like plums that I'm struggling with, they actually do better north of me. So if you're in a zone 7, chances are you'll do better with plums than me, and peaches. And in fact, there are things I absolutely cannot grow down here, like apples and cherries. So if you live north of me, you can grow a lot of the things I grow, but you can also grow a lot of things I cannot grow, and there are things that I grow that you can't grow. So just keep that in mind. You're still going to get something out of this video. Some trees in zone 8 simply will not grow. Zone 8, zone 9. This is an apple tree. I promise you, if you have a small lot, it is not worth your time to grow apples. Apples are in the palm family, P-O-M. Pears are in the palm family as well. Obviously, pears and apples are not the same fruit, but pears do wonderfully in zone 8 and zone 9. Apples do not. It's just pointless to grow something that will not grow, no matter how much you like it, when you can easily go out and grow something that will grow and learn to like it. Now, if you have a large lot, do like me, I've planted about a dozen apple trees. Every one of them has died except this one, and it's not really doing very well. It's never produced edible fruit. Don't suspect it ever will. When you see a tree with lichens on it, That's basically a dying tree. Now, the lichens don't cause a tree to die. They're just indicative of the health of the tree, because they won't grow on a tree until the tree starts getting sick. Another really important thing to keep in mind if you do decide you want to grow an apple tree, especially if you have a small lot, but even if you have a large lot, is you really don't need to be growing these from seeds unless you love crab apples. Crab apples are a little teeny tiny thing about the size of a marble. Hard, very difficult to eat, and very sour. And there's a reason for that. Apple trees are basically just very big, very sweet crab apple trees. They produce a similar fruit, even though it doesn't seem similar if you take a bite out of one and then bite another. But the reason for that is that crab apples are used as pollinators. So every commercial apple orchard that I know of has got a crab apple planted between every, say, 10 trees or so, because they put out so much pollen. They produce, cause the apple trees to produce so much fruit. But if you get a piece of fruit from an apple tree in general, it's created by pollen from a crab apple, and will create, in most cases, a crab apple. Now, you may live in an area where they won't let you grow fruit trees, or if they do, they only let you grow one or two. And that's terrible. But there are ways to plant things that are ornamental and edible. Daylilies, the roots are edible. What we call elephant ears that people plant, well, you don't have to plant that. You could plant taro, and that's very, very ornamental, but very, very edible. In fact, the vast majority, say a third of the population of the earth, is sustained by taro root, which is an edible ornamental plant. And cactus, you know, people put cactus in their ornamental gardens, and you can eat those. In fact, if all you can have is a lawn, you can actually eat grass, but you can't eat it if you're mowing it down. Some grass is better than others. But I think that when the collapse comes, people will stop mowing, and you won't really stand out if your grass is waist high. In any case, keeping all of your food down at the grocery store is just not a good idea, especially when you consider the fact that one of your options is keeping your food in your trees. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.